This week, it's about time that we hear about climate change, but really hear it. Next, Victoria Fernandez from 350.org dishes on the political and public effects of divestment. Surprising, but money does matter. Then, starting October 10th, we've got a week-long international push for people and planet and against the corporatocracy. Sweden deserves a shout-out, and finally, scream for me. But first, we reserve your rights. We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone. Refuse the rights of anyone, service we. Wrong color, wrong creed, wrong love, not like me. Yes, we reserve the right to pretend yours don't matter. It's a matter of my bigotry, my need to be right, far right, and better than you because me, this is mine, my place, God on my side, my witness, my right to offend yours. There's the door, go back where you came from and see this is the land of the free, so I'm free to be as hateful as I want to be, and you, well, you're anyone. And I reserve the right to refuse, mistreat, and misuse the word of freedom, to make my own kingdom of greed, hate, and please don't make a scene, just quietly leave. You can be what you are, away from me. I reserve the right to be free from your freedom to be you. Why choose this place, my space? Wouldn't you prefer to be with people like you? Wouldn't you rather stay with the same in that small space than venture here to me? Why not be free in your own home? No, you're not welcome here. Now do as you're told and leave. Ain't it good to be free? Totally free, totalitarianly. See, here's where it gets tricky. 100% free to hate you, berate you, discriminate, scapegoat you down. That's a dictator's crown. Free to kill, free to steal, free to cheat. This is real, 100% free. Like warlords and Wall Street cover-ups can't compete. Too big to fail, too big to jail. Free to kill, free to steal, free to cheat. This is real, 100% free. Totally, totalitarianly free. Psychopaths rise, madness on high. Yes, we reserve your rights and give them to who we like. Not on the list? Well, here are your chains. No need to wear them. Just know that you got them. Ours is not a house arrest, physical ties. It's a full arrest of the mind, bound in a blindfold with a four-letter word on one side, F-R-E-E, 100% totally, totalitarianly free. So you see, the freedom that you mean isn't full freedom at all. It's the freedom to be, to live in this space where others, not always the same, live, work. Yes, we are free to be citizens precisely because we agree that we can't be totally, totalitarianly free. Full freedom for some is servitude served to the rest. That's what's best. If you and your hate, your bigotry creed need some more space to spread out, then may I suggest you fashion a faction of, for, and by the dumbed down and hateful, like most of our Congress, minus the smiles and lip service bullshit, and take this totally free empire state to a state of exclusion, where you in delusion can be totally, totalitarianly free. And please make a scene. Bare your teeth, shut down the smokescreen. Let the world see how utterly fucked we humans can be, how painfully stupid, how blind, and how clueless the slaves of this corporate state are who shriek, "We are so free," quoting a concept unknown but believed. Believe it. The freedom to hate as you please is closer to chains than the laws that decree you are free to live here and be here, but you must agree that all of these others must also be free. We reserve the right to refuse the totally, totalitarianly free. Come on in. From tweets to marching in the streets, this is Act Out. Welcome to Act Out. I'm Eleanor Goldfield, and this is your tipping point. Apologies for the light shifting. As some of you know, music is one of my primary creative passions. So when I heard talk of a climate change composition, I got a little giddy. Whether activism is an everyday endeavor or not, you've likely seen or heard numbers thrown out there showing how the planet is warming. 5 degrees here, half a degree there, and it just doesn't stick. Like ice in the Arctic, it just kind of melts down your mind and you go about your day. Unless you're really into numbers, this talk of degree changes doesn't mean much to the average person. We can understand the concept of warming, but if you say 1.2 degrees, I don't know if I should say, oh, that's fucked, or just shrug and say, okay, and? Music, on the other hand, like art in general, has the ability to take these abstract numbers and turn them into something else. A vivid soundscape, an oral representation of this idea, this quickened crisis of climate change. But to slightly skew Elvis Costello's quote, talking about music is like dancing about architecture. So without further ado, here is the story and sound of our warming planet.
We know the Earth is warming, but some places have warmed up faster than others. Our changing climate is often illustrated with maps like this one from NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies. But visual representations are not the only way we can chart the geography of global warming. My name is Dan Crawford, and I'm a student at the University of Minnesota. I've been working with Dr. Scott St. George, who's a professor in the Department of Geography, to turn climate data into climate music. It's written for string quartet and uses all 4 instruments to describe the pace and the place of global warming. We've asked students from the University of Minnesota's School of Music to perform the piece, and also to help explain how we turned 135 years of thermometer measurements into music. The cello matches the temperature of the equatorial zone. The viola tracks the mid-latitudes, and the 2 violins separately match the temperatures of the high latitudes and the Arctic. The pitch of each note is tuned to the average annual temperature of that region. So a really low note on the cello means the equatorial zone was cold that year. And a really high note on the violin means warm weather stretching across the Arctic. When we blend the 4 instruments, the 4 regions together, you're able to hear quite clearly how temperatures fluctuate across the globe, from the equator to the North Pole. And if we start the performance in 1880 and end at the present, you can hear how much temperatures have increased and what regions have warmed the most. This is our newest composition, Planetary Band's Warming World.
Pretty incredible, right? I kind of just want to hack into the sound system at Congress and play this on repeat like Chinese water torture till the ass-jockey climate deniers either spontaneously combust or find logic. And since we're on the subject of climate change, you may have seen a few blips in the media recently about divestment, the act of uninvesting money, in this case, divesting from the fossil fuel industry. On September 2nd, the California Assembly passed a bill requiring the California Public Employees Retirement System and the California State Teachers Retirement System, which combined are responsible for $476 billion in assets, to remove all holdings in companies that get at least half of their revenue from coal mining. Fuck yeah on that one. And then last week, New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio announced a push to also divest pension funds from coal. And while coal certainly isn't the lone culprit in an industry rife with sludge, CO2, and flammable water, these divestments do matter. But don't take that from just me. Associate analyst and divestment expert Victoria Fernandez works with 350.org, a big player in the divestment and all-around environmental movements. She sat down with us last week to talk about the role of divestments on the public and the political stage. Take a look.
So divestment, I think, really changes the narrative that we've been hearing about environmentalism or climate change in general. It really targets the production side of the problem. And traditionally, we've been hearing about, consumption, like just we need to bike to work and we need to, only buy locally organic foods and things like that. But divestment really targets and stigmatizes the fossil fuel industry and really cuts at the source of the climate crisis. And the companies that have known that they've been producing, CO2 that is related to climate change for 30 or 40 years now, as we know from a report that was just done on Exxon. And so what divestment really does is it changes the lens of why we're in the moment that we're in terms of the climate crisis. And it really empowers the people to target specifically and point the politicians in the direction of these companies need to be regulated. These companies are those that have been bad actors. And that are not being regulated fully as well.
And how much does this actually hit? Like what portion? I mean, not a specific number, obviously, for all of the oil and gas industry, but what portion of their income comes from these investment opportunities? Is it like a really big hit for them, or?
Right. So divestment, there are probably $400 billion in United States endowments. So that's a big chunk of change. But even if we took all of that money away from the fossil fuel industry, it wouldn't really be a huge economic blow to them. They're one of the biggest industries in the world. And they're, a staple of our economy. They're the infrastructure. And so what divestment does is really stigmatizes. That's really its power, and that's been its power for a long time. So in South Africa and Darfur and tobacco divestment, those have all been examples where divestment has led to really restrictive legislation as a direct result. And so that's really where we're looking to make our main impact. Of course, it's always good to be taking money out of the fossil fuel industry in whatever amounts, and putting that toward community solutions and other renewable technologies. But that isn't really the main focus of divestment.
And I mean, of course, politics follow money. So if you take the money out of something, then the politics will naturally shift in that direction. So let's talk a little bit about California. California seems to be like a really, sort of a lens for the nation in some ways. People look to California for culture, for what's new in a lot of ways. And California passed a coal divestment bill. And it's the first state legislature to do so, if I understand that correctly. So how much of California is invested in coal? And I saw on 350.org it said, this isn't the end, because of course oil and gas are huge industries in California. Talk a little bit about the divestment in California and next steps in terms of that.
Yeah, definitely. So in California, we've had a lot of really good wins recently about especially with coal and tar sands. Stanford divested about a year ago. The University of California just divested from coal and tar sands. And as what you're talking about, the pension funds were just directed to also divest. So that's a big deal. But I think what you're hitting on is that, yeah, the coal isn't a huge part of the California economy, and we're mostly oil. We're the third largest oil producing state in the nation. And so where we're looking at now that we've gotten more of a coal is a little bit of a no-brainer right now. It's doing really poorly financially. It's in structural decline, and so right now what we're looking at more is a divest the rest campaign, in which we're specifically focusing on oil and natural gas and the things that are part of our state. We're still a fracking state. The governor has still, largely supported fracking. And large extraction in our state. And so that's really what we're looking at right now.
And I'm curious also, in terms of divestment, do you see, is there a chance that they might take the money from coal and then put it into fracking or something? Like, do you see the divestment as really shifting paradigms towards renewables, or is it sort of just like, okay, activists, shut up, I'll take it out of coal and I'll put it somewhere else when you're not looking?
Right. And I mean, that is always a concern. I think the main thing is that the fact that they're taking it out is huge. And what we're really looking to shift is public opinion on the fossil fuel industry. So the fossil fuel industry has largely been seen as, this sort of benevolent like actor that's giving us all what we need and what we want, and, what gets us to work every day, and what also, helps us farm and gives us our food and things like that. And the real political tactic here is that we need to change that conversation, because they're not energy companies as they say they are. They have, less than 1% of their capital expenditure in renewables. They're still largely like fossil fuel extractive companies. So that's really what we're trying to go for. So they may, pull the wool over our eyes in some sense, as in terms of getting out of coal and doubling down in fracking. It's not necessarily a wise investment decision, I would say. The energy sector for the last 20 years has been sort of a wash. So it's sort of good for them to be getting out of it. It doesn't really do much, but in terms of where the political impact is when they're taking their money out, and what political space that can create for more restrictive regulation.
Something you hear constantly, which is good that you hear it constantly, is that there's not a lot of time. Like, it's great that China got into cap and trade, but really that's essentially useless if it takes the amount of time that they're suggesting that it will take. So, we don't have a lot of time. Like, shit is really on down to the wire. So how can people plug into this movement now that it's pressing forward? And as well, are there plans for the divestment movement and other parts of that campaign to move towards more civil disobedience and more sort of intense actions?
Yeah, totally. I think the urgency part is really critical, especially when we're talking about climate change. And it's nice that you mentioned direct action. So last spring we had a large amount of schools that were sitting in. Swarthmore, Bowdoin, the University of Colorado system at Boulder, Tulane, Yale, University of Mary Washington, and they all did sit-ins. And so the University of California did a sleep-in, and we're seeing a lot more action towards that. And I think that is one of the other things that divestment does. It really organizes students that care about climate justice, that care about racial and economic justice, and it's giving them the tools to see that how they can make social change in this, way of nonviolent direct action, and allowing people to take risks together, and feel supported by each other, and continue to push that envelope, because it's true, we don't have a lot of time, and those kinds of actions are the things that create the urgency that make, regulation and political agreements possible.
To learn more about 350.org and the divestment movement, check out 350.org and gofossilfree.org. Before we leave the climate change camp, a big shout out to the activists in San Francisco who shut down the financial district last Monday, targeting in particular Bank of the West, an oil-soaked fracking climate change profiteer making loads of cash from fossil fuel investments. See how we just came around full circle with that divestment talk? It's all connected. It's all connected. So to hear more about this action and others like it, past and future, check out floodthesystem.net. Next up, let's head to the front lines for some international crimes and the activist response to stop them. Starting this Saturday, October 10th, activists around the world will be organizing coordinated actions against corporate power and for democracy, social justice, and public services. In other words, fuck those trade deals. Yes, deals. I know I've hammered the TPP home like an overzealous carpenter on meth, but my level of Jewish mother nagging is almost on par with the importance of the issue. Almost, but not quite. And yet, TPP is but one of 4 potential catastrophes slithering its way from corporate boardrooms into the halls of government. The other 3, TTIP, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership between the U.S. and the EU, CETA, the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, which, fuck me, isn't even proper English, that's between the EU and Canada. And finally, TISA, which I've mentioned before, the Trade and Services Agreement between 50 nations, including the EU and the US, covering 68.2% of world trade and services, according to WikiLeaks. So yeah, that's about the whole fucking planet bundled up for the taking. And that shit is not okay. So starting this Saturday and for the following week, people across the globe are boldly and indeed more eloquently saying that this shit is not okay. From Berlin to Barcelona, London to Bangkok, DC to Kathmandu, people are rising up against corporate power in the name of, pick an issue. Any issue that has to do with your life, well-being, work, food, air, education, friends, and family. I cannot stress this enough. These trade deals might sound like an Ambien-sponsored book on tape, but they are just as evil as they are boring. Literally every facet of your lives is encompassed in the pages of these secretive deals. Oh yeah, and in case you forgot or hadn't heard, no one is allowed to see the content of these deals. The bulk of what we know about them comes from leaks, as in WikiLeaks. And while that is also fucked, it proves something very important. These corporate fucksticks are afraid of us. They're afraid of the power that we have, the power that we can yield if we so choose. So keep fighting and start fighting. Head to tradeforpeople.org to find out more information about the call to action, actions that are already planned, how to create and add your own, and a full list of ideas, including using a frog to communicate with members of Congress. Get creative and fuck corporate power. Now, before we wrap up, I just want to give a huge shout out to Sweden, one of my motherlands. Well, actually, literally my mother's land. Last week, Sweden announced that it would become one of the first fossil-free welfare states in the world, pouring about $546 million into its 2016 budget, tagged for meeting the challenges of climate change, increasing renewable energy shares, and stimulating the development of innovative environmental technology. Heja Sverige, as we would say. So, what spurred this shift? Well, last summer, Sweden experienced intense heat waves and one of the world's worst brush fires in the country's history, and that's it. How many fucking heat waves and horrendous fires have we experienced? And I've still got members of Congress walking into work with fucking snowballs as evidence that God is not in fact making it hotter in here. I'd give a damn toe just to see some common sense exercised in that building. Just a little bit. Speaking of which, yet another tidbit of common sense comes with a decision to get extra funding for renewables from tax increases on fossil fuels. So yeah, when shit hits the fan and I'm wanted for trying to make this country a better place, I'll be in Sweden. But before then, one last thing. Coming back full circle again, let's talk music. My band, Rooftop Revolutionaries, is putting together a new music video. As part of this video, we want you to scream on screen. Kind of like that, but your take on it. For our song Sick, Tired, and Wasted, we will be including a montage of screams, a collective frustration of faces from a nation, a generation sick, tired, and wasted. For more info on this, check out our Facebook page, and whenever you got it down, email your scream video. iPhone videos are accepted to rooftoprevolutionaries@gmail.com. And for your listening pleasure, that song will take us out of this week's episode. And that's it. Thank you so much for watching. Please spread and share this episode and show with all of your friends, foes, and people you don't know. As always, check out the last slide to see all the sites that I mentioned in the show. There will also be a link to help support Occupy.com and the delicious dissent delivered daily thanks to donations like yours. It is a 501c3 nonprofit, so anything that you can contribute is tax deductible and hugely appreciated. Be sure to follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and subscribe on YouTube. From the shape-shifting, light-shifting Devil's Den, good night and act out.
We're all sick, tired, and wasted. We're all sick, tired, and wasted. You're not the only one. Low wage, debt's cage. Freedom comes in chains.